lot of those fish are actually, backing out of the lake and moving into those river systems. And so they become super targetable on a swung fly. And it's kind of the similar phenomenon to I think in the springtime, those fish are super hungry. They're coming in the shallows, so they're really easy to target. And then in the back end of the season, I think they feel that, the winter's coming. They're, really hungry. And so they rainbow trout kind of do that progression. They eat just about anything in the spring. They kind of see flesh and eggs coming down, so they get really particular about that.
That was Kyle Shea talking about swinging flies for Alaskan rainbows and the changing seasons. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. In today's episode, I talk with Kyle Shea, who breaks out some of his best tips for Alaska. Kyle talks about his connection with Deneki Outdoors and how he wrote over 1,400 blog posts for them over the years. We talk about leopard rainbows, the best time to catch rainbows, and a step-by-step guide to the gear you need for your next trip. Don't miss this one as Kyle tells us about one of the most important casts you need when fishing heavy flies in Alaska and really for any species. I wanted to quickly let you know of a new hosted fly fishing trip I have coming next year. This is your typical hosted trip, but on steroids. Go to wetflyswing.com/destination to get on the waiting list for the next big trip. We'll be heading to a lodge to one of the great destinations and accompanied by a few of the big guests from this podcast. We are planning trips eventually for Alaska, BC, Mexico, Belize, New Zealand, and more. But right now I only have 10 slots available for this first trip. So go to wetflyswing.com/DESTI Nation to get more information on the first trip and to sign up for the waiting list for any of the upcoming trips. So, without further ado, here is Kyle Shea. How's it going, Kyle?
Good, man. How are you, Dave?
Good. Great to have you on the show. We've, I think, I've talked about this before, but how I've kind of connected, to people throughout my little journey I'm on here. And Tom Larimer was, I think, the guy that kind of connected us. And it's pretty awesome because Tom, I'm not even sure on the downloads and all of my stuff, but I think his episode was definitely one of my favorites. The guy kind of broke things down in a systematic way. So hopefully we can get into some of that a little bit today, but maybe we can talk about, how you first got into fly fishing to start off and how, and is it Deneki or how do you pronounce that?
Deneki Outdoors. Yep, that's
okay.
where I worked for the past 6 years or so. Yep.
Yeah,
it's a
Deneki
common
Outdoors.
mispronunciation.
Exactly. No, I know. It's I've heard both ways, but yeah, Deneki. So, and I obviously, before I met you, I've seen lots of the blog posts and read stuff there on that site. But before we get into all that, maybe you just chat about how you first got into fly fishing.
Yeah, so I wasn't one of those kids necessarily that grew up with a fly rod in their hands like you hear about a lot today. Baseball was a big part of my life growing up, so played a lot of competitive sports and that sort of thing, and spent a lot of time outside as a kid and fished with a spinning rod for bass. Or I'm from Maine, Bar Harbor, Maine, so fished for mackerel and that sort of thing in the little bays around there, but nothing too serious until probably it all blends, but it's like probably the end of high school, beginning of college, kind of caught that fishing bug like most people do. When I could see kind of the end of the road for the sports career, so to speak, kind of found a different avenue, had a little summer gig, mowing lawns, that sort of thing, and worked with some folks that fly fished. So kind of got interested in it and more or less taught myself, had a lot of mentors along the way, of course. But started getting really serious into it once the baseball started timing out. And then kind of through that, it was actually kind of wild, but found out after kind of teaching myself how to cast and reading all up on fishing and that sort of thing, found out that my great grandfather, I guess, or two generations removed, actually had a commercialized, Atlantic salmon pattern on the East Coast. So kind of related to my grandmother before she passed back then. So it was kind of in the family. I didn't know it, but kind of found it on my own, and then fished throughout college and got really serious about it, and decided I really wanted to guide at some point. Thought I was going to do the fisheries biology thing, like I think most of us do. We're looking for a job early on. And then right out of school, kind of did an internship with Fish and Wildlife in Maine, and kind of realized that I'd rather fish than net fish. And so started guiding pretty much right out of college, got my guide license in Maine, and guided for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. I think I had my license, but it was more or less just, getting shop days, worked in, 3 shops, and just got some days when I could. But then throughout that whole process, in college, especially, read a lot of blogs, and nerded out and all that stuff. And the Deneki blog was one that I checked all the time and really respected. And so when it became time, when I decided I wanted to get outside of Maine and kind of fish for a living, so to speak, and actually guide full time, threw a lot of resumes out there. I think something like 120 gigs across the West and in Alaska. It was a long process and a lot of, emails back and forth, but actually got an email from Deneki from Alaska West, which they owned at the time, still do, to come out and guide for them. And so that kind of spun into the next chapter of doing it full time, working in Alaska.
Oh, cool. And what was the name of the Atlantic salmon? Was there a name of your great grandfather's pattern?
Yeah, it's called the Colburn Special. So my grandmother's maiden name is Colburn, and has 3 different variants. The most common one, which you can find in some shops still in the Northeast and in Canada, is like a chartreuse and black hair wing, so to speak. And there's like a few different color variations of that. I've been dying to do a long-term Atlantic trip, but they're all kind of said and gone in Maine right now.
Oh yeah. Right. What's the how do you spell Colburn?
Colburn.
Oh yeah. Cool. And then what was the so I'm just taking a look at I know I've heard of the Colburn. I've heard of that pattern. I'm looking at I got you. It's chartreuse and black.
There's a little bit of yellow. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's classic. And the baseball thing, what was were you thinking, going pro? Was that kind of your thought, or kind of going semi-pro on that? Was that before you got into the fly fishing?
That was the thought, I think, for my, young adult life, and then, played in college, but could kind of see, once getting into college that I wasn't a stud by any means. Yeah. But just love the game for sure. That's been kind of the same thing did with fishing is kind of tunnel vision into one thing, and baseball was that thing for the majority of my life. And then as soon as that sort of started running out as not being a career, so to speak, which, I wasn't delirious enough to think that it would be after a certain point. Fishing kind of came the exact same thing. So I was always an extremely, nerdy and technical hitter, for example. And I just kind of brought that into casting
and that's right.
It's kind of snowballed. Yeah.
And you got your FFI certification and everything there.
Correct. Yep.
What did it feel like when you, realized that baseball wasn't going to be it? Was that a pretty big hit, or what was that all like?
It's a good question. It's tough. I think, I have a lot of friends that kind of did the whole thing, a lot of fishing buddies actually that were, better players than I was, but, had kind of the same, upbringing, and everybody kind of talks about how you just get cut off so quick. But I mean, fishing for me became, more important, than sports. And so it was a really natural transition to me. As soon as all that ended, all I wanted to do was fish and become a, better guide and just take people fishing. And it's been a really good thing.
Nice. All right. Well, let's dig into a little bit. I think, you've obviously got a bunch of experience, up in Alaska, a number of different places up there. I did, I've had a few episodes, I guess a couple here talking about Alaska, but I was hoping to dig into a little bit on fishing for rainbows and maybe some other species as we get into it. But maybe you can first just start us off on, talking about the rainbow fishery up there. And I mean, probably a lot of people have seen the photos of those fish and, how different they look with the spotting and some of those depending on where you're at. But can you talk about what that's like and how fishing for rainbows up there is different from fishing for rainbows down the lower 48?
Yeah, for sure. So I've always said that rainbow trout in Alaska are, an entirely different species, seemingly, than the lower 48. And the cool thing about Alaska that I don't think gets enough credit, especially nowadays where we seem to be kind of sweeping under the rug what fish are native and what fish aren't native. And so one of the best things about Alaska is, they're all native species, which I think is pretty special. And especially this day and age where that's few and far between now, it seems. But the really cool thing about Alaska is people forget how big Alaska is. And so, if you were to, impose it on top of the map of the United States, it's like, I can't remember the exact, it's like a third or a quarter of the United States, something ridiculous. Right. And so you see all these kind of subsect populations of rainbows that are vastly different from each other. They look different, they fight different, they prefer different flies, all across the state. And a lot of that is because it's a really big state. And so it'd be like fishing, for trout in Oregon and then going over to, Colorado and fishing for trout. It's a huge geographic area. But one of the cool things about Alaska trout is they seem to react more like brown trout, right? They're much more aggressive. They take really big flies, everything from mouse flies to tiny traditionals. They do it all. Yeah. So it's a really cool.
So you really, are really catching cool those. You are catching them sometimes fishing with dry flies and small patterns. It's not all the big flesh flies and everything.
Yeah, for sure. I spent 6 years on Kanektok at Alaska West, and we didn't fish traditional dry flies very often. We walked a lot of side channels, which is really tiny water, kind of breaking through branches to get to walk up to a beaver dam, so to speak, where there's a couple fish potted up. And in those instances, you could throw a dry and get them to look up at it. But for the most part, they would take a mouse fly as well. And so, if you can get them to eat a mouse fly, it's not as interesting to toss in atoms in there. We always used to say how cool it was on the Kanektok to catch, fish on such big flies. But at the same time, it's kind of that New Zealand philosophy. It's pretty cool to catch really big fish on really small flies too. And you can do it all in Alaska, which is pretty cool.
Well, in Alaska West, what is the Alaska West? That's just is that a lodge out there, part of Deneki, or what? Can you explain what that is exactly, or is that a few different rivers?
Nope. So it's just one river, one lodge on a river. So Deneki Outdoors is a parent company of a bunch of lodges. So they have a lodge on the Dean River in British Columbia called BC West. A gig in the Bahamas that I worked at called Andros South Bonefish Lodge. They also own Rapids Camp Lodge on the Naknek River. And then our gig was Alaska West on the Kanektok River, which was a kind of a remote tent camp near the village of Quinnahock, kind of a little more towards the coast and a little more north than most Bristol Bay lodges. On a really special river, for sure.
Okay, and what's in the Kanektok? What's that river? If you had to quickly describe, what it looks like and everything, that area.
So it's pretty far from like the big mountainous, picturesque thing. I think most people relate to Alaska rivers. There are big mountains, but they're 100 miles away and kind of off in the distance. So it's really low gradient coastal river, really glassy, long runs, which lends itself to some really fantastic, swing spey opportunities. But it's really kind of a mild river. There's no rapids or very coastal.
Okay. And size wise, are you talking 100 feet wide, or how big of a river are we talking?
Yeah, it's it depends obviously on the point of the river. But yeah, it's at its widest, a couple 100 feet wide. In most runs that we would fish, a good spey caster, because that's how we fished a lot of the time, could pretty much fish the opposite bank or at least get the fly out to it. Gotcha. So not a huge river by any means. It's a long river, it's almost 100 miles.
Oh yeah. Cool.
But,
and it's got,
but not very wide at all.
And it's got all the species, everything you would want up there.
Yep. Yeah. We got, really impressive runs of king salmon that were really targetable on a fly. And then it gets all 5 species of salmon, a really big silver run. And then a really cool population of what we would call leopard rainbows. So those rainbow trout with the spots, the spots in their eyeballs and their bellies. Really stunning fish.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. As we go here, I'll add some pics and photos and things like that in the show notes. I'll try to find a good one of that. I'm sure you probably have one on your blog somewhere, right? That's one of the things you've written. We'll get into this a little bit later, but I think 1,400, right, over 1,000 blog posts or whatever.
Yeah,
which is
quite a few of them. Yeah,
which is crazy to think, because I mean, I think about just posting a one episode a week can be a challenge, but if you're doing 5 to 6 blog posts a week, I'd love to hear your strategy on that. But yeah, let's stick with a little bit more on as far as the river, the Kanektok, and I'm in what I've been calling the destination and DIY season where it applies, but I think here we might talk a little bit about the lodge experience, because I haven't really covered that, and Alaska West sounds like one of those kind of typical kind of great at lodge experiences. But before we jump into that, can you just talk a little bit about, how you catch rainbows out there on that river and what that looks like? And is it easy? Is it pretty much anybody that has never barely fished before can just go up there and slam rainbows?
Not really, actually. Surprisingly, not so. So yeah, anybody can go up there and catch fish, which is one of the best selling points of Alaska, right? And I've always told people on the sales side of things that if you only have, one trip a year, they can, pour your hard-earned money into. Alaska's so great because if the weather's punk, something fishes, salmon, at least on the Kanektok, salmon generally fished really well in the really poor weather. And when the sun was out, the rainbow trout fishing ramped up and got really good. But as far as the difficulty of the fishery, what was kind of neat on the Kanektok was trout were kind of the varsity game. So the salmon, it's like we said, it's not a very wide river, so the salmon are pretty condensed in the area. And generally, if you get a fly in front of a wild salmon, he's probably going to eat it. And so I wouldn't put the Kanektok as like a blue ribbon trout fishery as far as numbers are concerned. And what you get out of that is kind of a challenging fishery that's also rewarding. And so you can absolutely row down the river and catch piles of trout. But if you're looking for, a big, if you're upping your quality, you can kind of target different positions in the river and really hope for that, 1 or 3 or 5 fish in a day that are really special. And so guiding it, always really loved that side of it. Where I'm at now in Bristol Bay, a lot of these rivers, you catch a lot of trout, and it's the same situation. If you're going to go for quality, then you can target that. But on the Kanektok, it was more of a challenging game. And so we would always get guests, that would say, because we would always hang out in the evenings and try to figure out what they want to do and go over the program for the next day. We'd ask them, what they wanted to target. And often they would say, well, we're going to take it easy tomorrow. I want to fish for trout. And I'd have to explain to them, like, well, that's going to be a little more work. It's a little more technical, and we're going to have to be more focused. We're not just chucking into a pot of silvers and they're latching on. So,
gotcha.
So yeah, it's not as, Alaska gets a stigma for being, the easy thing, and good anglers don't want to go there because it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but that's not always the case. By any means.
And are you picking up fish from, when you're fishing for salmon in there? Well, I guess it depends, right? If there's so many salmon, you're probably not going to necessarily get into those, some of those bigger rainbows. But what, can you talk a little bit about how you do, if you did want to target some of those bigger rainbows, how you might go about trying to do that?
Yeah. So, the Kanektok is, every river's different, right? But on the Kanektok, you generally target different water. The couchier water, a bigger fish is smart enough and is big enough that he's not going to fight a lot of current to stay in, whereas a smaller fish might find this little micro pocket that he's comfortable living in. But it's the same game as it is in the lower 48. You find where they can comfortably be away from predators and they have an easy access to food. And that's generally where your biggest fish sits. And then you just adjust your tactics based on the time of the year. So Alaska, everything's changing all the time from, early season before the salmon get there. Fish are generally hungry coming off of the winter. So that's when they most likely were going to take mouse flies, big streamers, the really fun ways to fish. A lot of that happens in the early season because they're just so hungry and ready to eat. And then as soon as salmon start coming in and they start sniffing eggs, and then once they start dying off and flesh starts coming down there, everything changes. And so to target those fish, I always looked at it as you're not matching the hatch so much as you want to be just before the hatch happens. So if you can give that fish kind of the first hint of what's to come, that always seemed to be what pulled the really big guy out of there.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's so basically, yeah, it's similar to if you're fishing down in the lower 48 and the run and Spey, right? Are you fishing with the kind of doing the Spey game out there for rainbows or both rainbows and salmon?
Yeah, so on the Kanektok, one of our big draws was our king fishery, swinging for kings because it's such a low gradient river. And it's really easy wading. It's all just, golf ball size rocks, if not smaller. And it from, camp all the way down to tidewater where it hits the ocean. Every run essentially is, stand on the gravel bar and chuck a big cast across and make a mend, and it pretty much fishes itself all the way through. Obviously, someone that fishes a swung fly, has a little experience actually fishing a swung fly rather than just letting it rip on through is going to catch more fish, but you're generally in the game just because the water is so good and conducive to swinging flies. And so for kings, that was super effective and productive and really popular. But yeah, we'd get guests that would want to also swing for trout. And as trout spey has evolved in this funky little industry, there's been a lot more interest for that. And of course, we as guides would go out and swing for trout just because we really enjoy it. There are, other rivers out there that are, better trout spey rivers. But like I said before about the Kanektok, the fish that you get when you do get one are really stunning. So it's super rewarding. So it wouldn't be the tool if you were just a numbers guy, which none of us are, but it's a fun way to fish. And so we would swing for trout as well. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're going to dig a little more into some of the fishing tips and things like that. And I know, obviously on, writing for, Deneki, you've had a lot of opportunities to get into the tips and stuff. Can you, talk a little bit about what that was like? And, obviously you've written a lot there, and maybe talk about what some of your most popular or maybe some of the blog posts that you're most proud of, that are out there.
Yeah. So, so the writing kind of snowballed really fast. So when I first went up to Alaska West, was just the guide, obviously, and just kind of learning the ropes, and was really green on Alaska fishing. And I've always loved learning. And so I was just trying to be a sponge and learn as much as I could. And then had always read the Deneki blog. So always thought it was really cool. It was kind of the Alaska West was like the mecca of where I wanted to work for the longest time. And then right after my first season in Alaska, we needed someone in the Bahamas to kind of be a, host sort of person, do casting instruction and that sort of thing at our bone fishing lodge. And then the owner at the time, who had started the blog and really kind of built it up to what it was at the time. Was that? Andrew Bennett. Oh yeah,
Andrew Bennett. So he was the guy running the blog. So a lot of the blog posts still out there you might read, although a bunch are yours, probably a lot are his. And are there a bunch of other people that wrote the blogs?
Yeah, so Andrew wrote it for I would say I think about half the posts that are published now, and then I took it over, or he adminned the posts. So he wrote most of them, but he also had he would ask someone to write a post for the blog, that sort of thing. So a lot of contributors along the way, and then I took it over I think in 2014, and it was did like you mentioned, the 1,400 or however many posts after that, which was I think ended up being about half. At the time. And then throughout that time when I was writing it, 1,400, I think were, a large majority were, original articles and that sort of thing, but definitely had a lot of input from a lot of articles from guides and even guests that would want to write a post or would reach out to some other folks in the industry and ask if they wanted to, do a post about sink tips or whatever. So I had a lot of help along the way. For sure. And a lot of the posts that I would write myself came from, tips that I would hear from from fellow guides or friends or even clients or just anyone with a good idea that I thought someone could get value out of anywhere in the world. So.
Gotcha. Okay, and Andrew, what do you think is the big thing? Maybe the biggest thing you learned from him, or something how he influenced you.
He was a huge influence to me. I think he kind of taught me really early on how important content was, which nowadays you hear about it all the time. I think he was way ahead of the time, though. He kind of caught the blog age in its heyday when blogs were the Instagram of the era. And so just the idea of creating content at scale and always bringing value to the reader and what that can really do for your business. And I think he had the foresight, which you see a lot now, but back then wasn't so status quo. But just to give all your tips and your advice, and it's not easy for a lot of guides or business owners or anybody to just give your stuff away for free. Here's how we do this. Here's how we fish. Because it seems like you're giving secrets. But
exactly. Did you feel like? I mean, was there ever a time when you were, you pull back and didn't share the secrets? Or are they all pretty much on the blog? If you want everything, everything are they all out there?
No, we would hold some back, and I never, when I would ask people to contribute, never wanted anybody to, share the stuff that they felt like was their intellectual property if they didn't want to, that sort of thing. But we wouldn't always do it real time, right? It wouldn't be like, hey, we're catching, fish on, sculpins today, that sort of thing, so that everybody could just go do the same thing on our river. But tried to share as much as I could. I've always felt like there's so much information out there that if you're not sharing it, someone else is going to share it. And I think it's better for the industry, for us all to not keep secrets and lend a hand to folks trying to get started. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, that they really appreciate the blog and they're really impressed that, you guys share all your tips, and just goes to show that you are confident and that you guys are, top of the game. And so people come and fish with us, and it just kind of works out in its own, way. And so people appreciate it.
Right. So you saw a lot of, just from the blog itself, you would see definitely it was driving traffic and clients from those blog posts.
Yeah. I think it was a big part of our kind of marketing efforts.
That's right. How do you decide to go with, 5 or 6 blog posts a week as opposed to, 1 or 2 or 12?
Basically, so Andrew was doing 6 per week at the time when I first took it over. He was doing 6 for a long time. I think his strategy was just he wanted one a day, and Sunday was his day to get a bunch of content together and breathe. And so that's what he did. And then as soon as I took it over, I just did my best to keep he made it great, really. And so I just kind of kept it going and so kept the same model. And then over time, we scaled it back to 5 at one point, because we did an email newsletter that was just a big mashup of all our posts. And so we found out that with a little analytics, that the day that the newsletter went out, most people read the newsletter and not the post that was live. Mm-hmm. So by dropping one, that actually made a little more traffic, believe it or not. So gotcha. one less post that was able to get our quality of content up a little higher, and then it actually boosted engagement, which was kind of neat. So then we went to 5, for the longest time. And the guy that's looking after the blog now, since I left, he's, as far as I know, still rolling on the 5 deal too.
Who's that?
His name's Danny Frank.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep, he's a Colorado guy, has an outfitter in Colorado, and he's taken it over since.
Perfect. And what is if you had to say maybe a couple of things, maybe say what is the post that you're most proud of, and then maybe you can talk about one that might be the most useful for somebody going for rainbows in Alaska. If you could think of one, I'm not sure. It might be hard out of all of those.
Yeah, oh man, there's a lot to pull from.
Is there an organization thing? I mean, what would you recommend if somebody say was doing Alaska rainbows? They just go to Deneki and Google up, rainbows in Alaska, or how would you recommend people to find the best resources on the site?
On that site, so they can search.
Yeah.
They can search around on the website for sure. They can Google, Deneki, and then just about any sort of topic's probably going to come up. They can also go to my website. I have most of my original posts. So if someone contributed, I didn't share links on that, but have a lot of my original stuff on my website and with links. So, you can see kind of broken down by topic, and then you click on the link and it'll bring up the original content.
Oh, okay.
That's an easy way to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you have it all. So pretty much, and you said you've got most of those on your site, the links.
Yep. Correct.
Oh wow,
yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, so you can go to rainbow trout or trout tips, and
okay.
There's
that's right.
A bunch of them.
Yep. Yeah, you have it all. I did. Yeah, I checked your site. You have it all organized pretty well. So that's a good resource. Okay, and is there one that sticks out as one that maybe got the most reads, or do you have any idea which one might be the biggest, most popular post over the years?
To be honest, and I think it's just because it got shared by a lot of friends and clients and that sort of thing. But I think probably when I checked the analytics before getting done, I did a little sign off post just saying thanks for that everybody was reading, or for everybody that read it along the way and that sort of thing. And I think that was actually probably one of the most traffic.
There you go.
Probably thanks to social media or whatever. But I think that as far as the actual stuff that people read for the content, I think the ones that actually picked up the most traction, oddly enough, were like the really short, simple tips, a lot of gear hacks. So simple things like, making sunglass lanyards out of fly line, or sunglass retainers out of fly line, little hacks like that.
How do you do that? What's the tip there? Is there a special knot, or how do you
basically do a nail knot? So you just make I have a little video somewhere in there. It's also on my Instagram, but you can make a nail knot without a tool. And so just by looping the fly line back around. And so just basically make two pieces of fly line and nail knot it to one side of the sunglass or one side of the earpiece, and then do the same on the other side. And then you can either make like a slip knot so that you can kind of adjust it, or you can just blood knot them together. And in a pinch, it works good, so you don't lose your sunglasses in the drink.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure. That's a good one. Any other good quick tips out there for? I guess maybe we could just talk about just fish in Alaska. Any other things that come to your mind, or other blog posts that were popular?
Other blog posts that are popular. We used to do a lot of like rigging, like expert rigging tips. So we would do such and such a person and what they would fish for kings. I just did something similar for hatch for rainbow trout, of all things, which is relevant to the conversation. I basically just a rundown of everything you use, from the backing and the knots all the way through the fly line and leader and fly, rod, reel, the whole setup.
Also, you go through, you walk through step by step in a blog post, just all the, what you need to fish for rainbows in Alaska.
Yep. Or what so-and-so would prefer. So you kind of see what rod they use and why. Okay. And yep, those are always really popular.
Can you run down that, maybe do a summary of that, that post, or just what they might need to get ready for this?
For rainbows?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if my personal rig, is that you're asking for?
Yeah. Just your whole, maybe just go from the rod, reel, line, leader. Just kind of a quick little summary.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a huge advocate for a 7-weight in Alaska when it comes to trout. So, you always use split shot or really heavy streamers or wind resistant mouse patterns. There's a lot of reason where a little backbone can help. A lot of people bring a 5 or a 6 weight and are generally a little undergunned, especially with a 5. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of a 7-weight. Up here I fish a G Loomis IMX Pro 790-4. Which is a super good rod, super good price. But it's actually one of my favorites. And then I pair it with a Hatch Fanatic 5+, which it's kind of counterintuitive, but a 5+ hatch actually matches up pretty good with a 7-weight as far as the balance goes. It feels really light in hand, so I've always liked that. And then I rig all my reels with Hatch premium backing, because it's thin, but it's a little thinner than 20-pound Dacron, but it's, I think, 68-pound test or so. It's almost 70-pound test, which in Alaska is really cool because you never know when a king is going to hop on. They do eat trout flies at times, or a chum, or you foul hook a sockeye or something by accident. So that extra backing can be a big help. The trout's probably not going to pull deep into it, although they do it at times, in some fisheries. But it's nice to have that, that stout backing on there. And then for, depending on how, I'm fishing, I like to build my own leaders. So I'll use, Hatch, mono, or sometimes Maxima, usually from about 20, sometimes 25, down to 12-pound, and just kind of build a leader in usually about 2-foot sections. And then, adjust the tippet accordingly. I usually fish 2X, fluorocarbon for the majority of fishing in Alaska until they make me go down to, 3 or 4X. I'll stay at 2. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And then, like you said, you might be using a mouse pattern, weight, split shot. And typically, are you guys doing more swinging or more, and are you doing the bead thing and all that stuff? Can you talk a little about the different techniques that might be used?
Yeah, so we do it all. And it's changes per time of year, for
when
sure.
When is the best time? When would you say, if you had to pick one time of year to go down there to hit the rainbows, when would that be?
It depends on the style of fishing that you like, and that's not being salesy.
Say for
anybody that works,
if you wanted to swing up some
swing flies, so you probably go either early because they're pretty hungry and they start to pile up, especially like in Bristol Bay right now. They pile up in a lot of little micro rivers between lakes, which is a lot of the fisheries in Bristol Bay, and so that makes a really good scenario where you can swing or fly through a lot of fish.
Gotcha. So this is like a June is early.
Yep, June, like mid-June to first couple weeks of July.
So pretty much right now would be a great time to hit it.
For sure. And then a lot of the bigger rivers, like the Queege or the Naknek, where you see those really big chrome steelhead looking rainbows, a lot that can be going off right now, but the prime time for that's in the fall. So usually late September into October, a lot of those fish are actually, backing out of the lake and moving into those river systems. And so they become super targetable on a swung fly. And it's kind of the similar phenomenon to I think in the springtime, those fish are super hungry. They're coming in the shallows, so they're really easy to target. And then in the back end of the season, I think they feel that, the winter's coming. They're, really hungry. And so they rainbow trout kind of do that progression. They eat just about anything in the spring. They kind of see flesh and eggs coming down, so they get really particular about that at times during kind of the summer into August and September. And then as September starts petering out and into October, they kind of get back onto they're not so picky anymore. They're going to eat anything that's in its way.
Right, before things get cold and shut down a little bit. That's cool. Okay. But go ahead.
Oh, but because so a lot of people see that early and late season in Alaska is like the only time to go for trout. One cool thing about August and kind of that middle area, especially towards the end of August, those fish compared to the fish in the spring are also putting on a lot more weight. So if you want to target bigger fish, rather than maybe catching more fish early season, you might actually, lock up to a few lifetime fish, later on. So,
oh, okay. So
there's a good time to fish for them just about the whole season. So.
I see. Okay, cool. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, and I'm not even sure if there is potential down there at the, Alaska West in that area to kind of go and do it on your own. But maybe you could talk a little bit about just the lodge experience, what for somebody that hasn't done it before, what that's like. And I guess we could just use the Alaska West since that's kind of what we're talking about here. What is somebody, maybe you talk first about, what they should do to prepare for a trip like that. And then also just what the whole thing is like. Is this, you got jacuzzis all over the place and, so kind of fine dining or what is that whole thing like?
Not so at Alaska West was very, very not jacuzzis and wine and dining. So we used to call it a tent lodge. And so it's everybody stays in weatherport tents. And the weatherport tents for the guests are nice, clean tents with two, normal beds, twin beds and a little heater and a little closet organizer. So, you're roughing it, but it's pretty cushy.
Yeah.
And then the
glamping.
The lounge.
This is the glamping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. Yep. And the guide quarters are typical guide quarters. They're way less nice. Which also makes it fun.
Well, what is that? What is way less
nice?
So you're in a small tent kind of there without a heater, or what's?
No, you got a heater. They're just, they're older tents, and they're usually, two to a tent, 2 or 3 guides to a tent, and guides and me included are generally not super worried about pretty things or
I was gonna say, what is that like?
Things like that.
What is that like when you're in a tent for? I guess you're out there for 4 or 5 months at a time, or how long are you out there in the tent with these two guys kind of doing?
At Alaska West, it's shorter season, so it's only like a 3 month.
Okay.
Yeah, about a 3 month. 3 months.
3 months.
Season,
What's that? What's that feel like for somebody who's never been in a guide tent for 3 months with a couple other guides that maybe aren't totally hygienic?
Yeah, it depends on the person. It stinks if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah,
it's doesn't smell good, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's all the furniture in the tents are generally kind of bush carpentry, so we build them out of whatever plywood's left, and so everybody kind of, it's like going to college and kind of setting up your dorm room. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's Boy Scout camp. It kind of. Which is a kind of a fun part of it all. You kind of make a little home for the summer, and then, you pack it up, and all the, at that camp, all of our stuff would get packed away for the summer. So we take it all apart, and build it the next year again. And just keep doing the same thing every season. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you're putting this down. This is out on just a remote river, on the river, and you're in the location. Are there other, I guess there's other guides and things like that, folks around the area. What is that like? Is there other pressure and people coming in? And is this a fly-in sort of deal?
No, it's so we were only like 5 miles or so from a native village called Quinhagak that has an airstrip.
Okay.
So in this program, we'd fly into the village and then take our boats, 5-6 miles upriver to where the camp is. But as far as traffic, there's 2 other gigs on the river, which brings some traffic, as well as the people that live in the village. They're ripping around the river every once in a while, and there are some people that float it, occasionally. So there's some traffic for sure. Nowadays, it's really hard to find remote rivers that nobody knows about. Right? There are fewer and fewer secrets every year. It's still incredible fishing, and the fishing kind of sustains all that pressure well. But it's definitely not. They're not alone out there. That's for sure.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've kind of covered, a little bit of the experience there. And, like you said, if you want that type of experience which is cool. That's a kind of a remote, not necessarily a lodge, like a full on, buildings, but tent. It seems like a great experience. What would be the, have you worked in some places where the opposite, end, where you've got the full extreme, you do have the jacuzzis and that whole thing? And is that experience a lot different? Yeah.
So in January of this year, so I just, finished up with Deneki. And so this is the first year that I'm not going back to Alaska West this summer, and took a job as the marketing director for a company we're kind of rebranding right now as Bristol Adventures, but that owns Kulik Lodge, which is actually one of the first, if not the first, fly-out lodge in Alaska. And they're kind of the next level up from, say, that tent lodge. So, really nice cabins that we just, renovated, new cabins. So every guest, has a cabin. And then the guide quarters are still guide quarters, but they're, a structure as opposed to a tent. But it does have an outdoor jacuzzi. But it's not like a wine and dine place. And so I really relate to it because it's a very similar program to Alaska West as far as the vibe and how the quality fisherman that comes through there and that sort of thing. And then we also have another gig that I'm scheduled to get out there too, but haven't been out there yet, but called Mission Lodge, which is another historic lodge in Alaska. And that's very much so the wine and dine, like you put it, you know, with the, you know, jacuzzi and sauna or whatever, and a really fancy lodge and you know, really high end accommodations. And so it's cool to see all the different levels of service, right? Because you attract different levels of customers, and you don't compete against each other, and you can kind of, as you know, as of now, you know, we're able to, you know, if someone calls up and wants to go fishing, we can kind of place them, you know, by their interest, which is
there you go.
It's pretty cool.
It sounds a little like Jim Klug with Yellow Dog, who I'm trying to think now if I think that one's coming up here in a little bit. I actually talked to him, and let's see here. Yeah, that'll be out in I guess probably next month. But yeah, he was talking about kind of the same thing. How that's really cool. How they can find the right lodge, and you know, just whether it's a lodge or just experience for the person, where you can chat with them and see exactly what they want. It sounds like that's with your new gig. That's kind of what you guys are going for. Somebody comes in and I think you actually mentioned, I think you also even do with this new company, even not even fly fishing trips, right? Do you guys do other things?
Yeah, we do some. We do some conventional stuff. So if guys want to come, you know, and fish a spinning rod and that sort of thing, as long as it's, you know, legal within the, you know, the fisheries that we're going to fish, you know, they're more than welcome to do that. We do some king salmon fishing on the Nishigak that, you know, that's primarily like a, you know, conventional gear sort of thing, because it's such a huge river. There are some guys that have some success swinging flies, but it's a massive ditch. And so you're straining a lot of water to find them. And so most, even pretty fly centric gigs still will bounce gear down through the Nush. And so we'll do that. And then there's a small part of our clientele that is really just into getting out and seeing, you know, Bristol Bay. And so 3 of our lodges are within Katmai National Park, which is super stunning part of Alaska, part of the world. And so they just like getting out there and driving around on the boats and seeing bears and that sort of thing. So they do some of that. And then a lot of people obviously fish some, but might not be, you know, fishing might not be their entire life, like it is for some of us. So they just get out there and fish a little bit, but like to see the sights, fly around in airplanes and look at volcanoes and all that stuff. So yeah, we do plenty, but it's definitely, it depends on the gig. You know, some of our gigs are more hardcore fishing, and some of them, you know, tailors to a bunch of different interests.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just kind of looking at a map here of Katmai National Park, which is, you know, and where is that in relation to the Alaska West stuff we're talking about, the Kanektok?
So Katmai's, so if you can see Katmai, so Alaska West pretty much due west, and a little, just a hair north on the west coast of Alaska.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Katmai is technically, you know, the Bristol Bay watershed. So Katmai National Park is kind of an interior, and then extends out to the coast, to the east. But it kind of is defined as part of, you know, all the fish that come through Bristol Bay all kind of make their way up into that watershed. And then Alaska West is kind of on the other side of I believe the Kuskokwim Mountains, and empties out into Kuskokwim Bay. And so it's kind of just north, that next bay to the north.
Yeah, I got you. That's what I was wondering. I've actually spent a little time up on the Queeflook in that area out of Bethel.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know. So basically from the Queeflook, it'd be just in that area, kind of north of there, the Yukon Delta.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, we'd always fly out of Bethel. You know, it's only like a 30-minute flight, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we
from Bethel.
And one of the things I remembered about that, at least that one trip, was you know, there's a lot of water bodies, and I mean, I didn't go a day without wearing a net on my head, and I didn't have any of my skin exposed. I mean, is that, I guess that's an early thing, or is that something that your clients are dealing with?
There's always bugs. Yep. So everybody always wants to know when's the best time to come, you know, when there aren't bugs. And there can always be bugs, but July is generally the best time. It's the warmest month. So warmest and usually the driest, which is a grain of salt, obviously.
Yeah,
big asterisk on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but there's seasons of the bugs. So in June, or if you're there in May, which most lodges aren't open then, but it can be hellish for bugs. That's mosquito time usually, and then white socks, usually, which are like black flies, usually come out slightly after, if not at the same time. And those kind of beat you up for the front half of the season, and then white socks can kind of come in and out, and mosquitoes are there sometimes further in the season, but then once you get into the back end of the season, it's usually no-see-ums really bump people out the most.
That's right.
And they're like a little, almost like in
killers.
Bahamas, we used to call them sand fleas, but they're similar bug.
Yeah, no-see-ums are.
And some people are, some people have, worse reactions or are bothered by them more than others. I've never bothered me much. I'm from Maine, right? So some of the bugs there I think are worse than in Alaska, but Alaska definitely gets the reputation for
well, it depends on your blood type too. We were just out actually on a local river, and my daughter, I don't even know, I guess she's got a different blood type, but I didn't get hit at all by mosquitoes, and her face was like swollen up from sleeping outside. And
we've had guides that they'll get they get bit by a white sock and their whole ankle swells up. Oh, wow. So they're can hardly take their socks off. At the same time, I don't think I've worn bug spray in 4 seasons up there because they just don't seem to bother my blood type, like you said, as much. So yeah, it's definitely super personal.
So you guys go with the bug spray as opposed to the face, the nets and all that stuff.
Some of our guys use the nets, especially when working around camp. There's some like slacky water and kind of swampy water in the back of camp. So when we're setting up camp or whatever, head nets are a big thing. But there's always the macho side of it. Some guys don't wear them because they don't want to be show that they're weakness.
They'd rather put on some nasty chemical onto their whatever that stuff. DEET, right? DEET is the yeah.
Personally, I can't stand the head net in my vision. So I don't wear one, but I always would have 2 in my boat for guests if they prefer them, because there's no use being miserable for no reason. So.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, let's jump in. I had a couple more questions just on some tips, and I know since you're a fly casting instructor, you've been through that process. I know that's not an easy thing to get through. What do you think? When you get people up there, I guess you've had all sorts of beginners and experienced anglers, but is there a casting tip, or a common struggle that you see with people coming up there or something maybe you might provide here that can help people become better at casting?
Sure. So. For a tip for Alaska, because you're not casting very friendly flies, it's rare. You do get, like we were talking about before, you do get those opportunities to fish, dries and light fry patterns and things like that are more like what you would fish in the lower 48, traditional fly fishing. You have those opportunities, but for the most part, you're fishing some pretty ugly setups, split shot and in really big flies and stuff that the wind just wants to throw right back in your direction.
And where's the split shot going? Where's the split shot going? Is this just typical? You're putting it 12 to 18 inches above your fly, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yep. Usually it's a standard nymph rig. So we always call flesh or bead fishing. All it is nymphing. It's just a egg pattern or a flesh fly instead of a
you're swinging it, and you're kind of swinging those flesh flies with weight on.
No, flesh is generally, we'll swing flesh patterns on a Spey rod just to, try to catch fish on the swing. But generally, if you're trying to really catch a lot of fish, you're dead drifting those. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Trying to look like a natural piece of flesh just bumping down the water.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for a casting tip, most people come up there and they, from my experience, and they try to cast like they would with a virtually weightless fly, which, creates a really tight loop, and usually ends up causing tailing loops because the rig is so heavy. You have to open up that loop a lot more in order to get it in the water without fouling.
Right.
So a standard, they call it a Belgian cast or an elliptical cast. It's a huge tool for the saltwater when you have, wind blowing on your dominant shoulder and you're trying not to get the fly in the ear. But basically, making your back cast low, like a sidearm plane, and then coming over the top on your forward cast. So you're kind of making a big circle. By definition, it's a continuous motion cast, and so you never really have to pause on the back cast. You just kind of roll it back and over the top.
Yep.
And that's a great way to get all that heavy junk out in the water safely without fouling up.
Do you ever do any that's a great tip. Do you ever do any where, I don't even know what it's called, but where you come in the back cast and you let it touch the water behind you just for a second or on the side, and then use that as your leverage to shoot it
totally
out?
Yeah, for like in like a water load. Yep. So that's a super good tool if you're floating and you have water behind you. Sometimes if you're fishing on foot, you don't always have that that water behind you to load against. But if you're drifting, like most Alaska guides will have oars mounted on their jet boat so that they can row just like a drift boat. And in those instances, yeah, absolutely. You just kind of flip it over and use that water tension to load the rod and then just flip it back in the game. I think one of the best tips in all arenas of fly fishing, at least in moving water, maybe not so much in sight fishing, but keeping your fly in the water as long as possible and actually fishing for the maximum amount of time throughout the day. Obviously relates to more opportunities to catch fish. So anything you can do to maximize the time your fly actually spends in the water and not above it, over time, over days and weeks and years will relate to more fish caught. So something like a water load where you're not false casting, 2, 3, 100 times in the air, just being able to flip it back and get it back in the game, that will translate to more fish in the long run.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip on the casting, because it's never easy casting with a bunch of weight and our guys. So it sounds like mostly it's still a 9-foot kind of traditional 7-weight rod, but you said there is a little bit of Spey. Is it kind of a 10% of the guys are coming up there Spey casting, or is that becoming a bigger thing? And what would you recommend for the rods to bring if somebody's going up there to, say, in mid-June to early July? What rods should they bring up there?
For Spey rods?
For maybe Spey or both. What would you recommend to a guy that maybe does a little bit of Spey and traditional, or should he choose?
Yeah, so totally, I recommend bringing both. Yeah, I would never, suggest pigeonholing yourself into one method, because you never know, especially if you enjoy Spey casting or fishing a swung fly. Then it's definitely worth bringing up. A rod takes up a very little amount of space in the grand scheme of things. So for a single hander, 7-weight is king. There's a lot of great 7-weights on the market. I think something not super, super fast is best, because you're going to be oftentimes going to be throwing shorter casts with difficult flies. It's nice to have a little softer tip to be able to load that in close.
Would glass be a good rod to bring up there? Do you see much glass?
We see some. I would say it wouldn't be the best rod to bring up, but it's fun. So I definitely enjoy fishing glass, and so it's I understand the fun factor side of it. But like I was saying before, I use that IMX Pro. It's a fast rod by all standards. It's just not quite as fast as like what I would use on the flats, for bonefish or whatever. Yeah. Which is one reason I like it. But then to answer your question on the Spey side of things, there's a lot of different theories. So a lot of people like if they're going to be, say, swinging for trout, they like a smaller Spey rod because they like playing that trout on a smaller rod, just like the fiberglass, because of the fun factor. Personally, I think the best thing about Spey fishing is that tight line grab, because your fly is always under tension. The moment the fish hits the fly, it's that electric grab, right? That's what we all love about it. Yeah. And so because of that, I don't put too much thought into lighter rod so that I can feel the fish load the rod. I want to know that if there's that really special fish that hops on, I have the backbone to land them. Right. Or because there's so many other critters swimming around Alaska that might also eat the same fly, it's nice to have a little more backbone to play a fish that hops on that you're not expecting, whether that's a king or a steelhead, or depending where you're fishing. Right. And so I like a 7-weight or a real stout 6, shorter Spey or switch rod. I like rods kind of like that sub 12 foot. That's why I like that IMX Pro. It's 11. But I like it in that range because it's a good happy medium between it casts, it can cast as far as you'd ever need to, but you can still fish it in tight quarters but still mend and fish it well. Whereas a switch rod, can get in real tight, but it's more difficult to control your fly with a shorter rod like that.
And that G Loomis, the IMX Pro you're talking about, is that a Spey or a single hand rod?
Both. So one is they have a series of single handers and Spey.
Gotcha.
And I fish both of them in Alaska. Yeah.
Okay. And what so this 9 foot 7 weight, is that the rod, the traditional rod you'd go with there?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Some people like a 9.5 or a 10 if they're going to be 10 footer. If they're going to be, boat fishing, a lot of the fishing like around Anchorage, like down towards the Kenai and those areas, people love the 10-foot rod. Personally, I'm such a casting geek that I like the standard 9 foot. It's what I've always used.
Yeah. Well, is there a difference in casting between a 9 and a 10? Is one easier than the other?
It's all about getting used to. So the longer the lever, right, the more influence you have in your hand, the more movement you have in your hand, the more influence there is at the tip, the longer it gets, right? Because it's a big fulcrum. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of getting used to the rod. Obviously, a longer rod gets a little heavier.
Yep.
To me, I feel like it's I'm trying to make nice casts with tight loops. It just feels like more work to me. So I like that 9 footer, but I know guys that swear by like that extra 6 inches. So
yeah. Okay. And
teach them.
And just on rough on cost there. So that IMX Pro 9 foot, say 7 weight. What is just rough ballpark on cost for that rod?
Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's $495 retail.
Yeah. So
and then the Spey rods.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Spey rod's $575, and not trying to be a salesperson. I do think it's the best. Just having a long, in-depth conversation last night at the fly shop about this, but I do think it's probably the best deal on the market. It's a super durable rod. I mean, all rods break, can break, but they're super, super tough. I'm not really sure how they made it so inexpensive, to be honest, because it fishes just as good as rods that I fish that are $1,000. So.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a killer.
That's awesome. Okay, and also on the cost difference, I was just thinking about this earlier on the lodges. So, what's the difference? So you got the high end. I guess you're talking about your Bristol base, some of the stuff you guys have now. That high end with the jacuzzis, say a 7-day trip for that versus the Alaska West tent camp. Is there a big difference in cost there, or is that a different deal?
Generally, so I think at the time Alaska West. The last time I worked for him, I think it was in that, I want to say 6,390, 6,500-ish. And then you have a charter to get out. So, you're probably getting out there for $7,000 or so.
Yep.
Our gig, that's probably most similar, but higher amenities, which would be Kulik Lodge, that I'm working for now. That's actually a cheaper trip. But the way we break it down is, there's a trip price because we have really good home waters on the Kulik River that you could just go to the lodge and fish right there. And there's a short little river that you're going to catch a pile of fish, especially trout. Some of the best trout fishing
in Alaska. You mean just going out there, just go there without a guide sort of thing?
No, lodge? They guide it, but you can fish it in the evenings by yourself too, which is a huge selling point to that operation. But so you can fish on site, but we also, part of our parent company owns a flight service called Katma Air, so it has a whole fleet of airplanes. And so, it's a fly out gig. And so the way we structure it is there's a trip price, which is, similar to like the former gig at Alaska West, but you can add on fly outs. And so, which is pretty cool, little deal to have, because if you can only afford so much, you can still come up to Alaska and have a great trip. Or if you don't want to fly out, you don't have to, but you don't have to pay for it. And, but then the other lodge, Mission Lodge, that's an all-inclusive deal. So that's substantially more expensive, like in that 10,000 range, which is pretty standard for that level of lodge in Alaska. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of different options. And are there people up there that are, say, going to, I guess we can bring back to the Kanektok in that area. Are people kind of going up there doing the DIY thing? Do you see people coming in there I guess probably be a few amount, but do you ever see that?
No, there's a decent amount actually. Okay. Yeah, it receives a decent amount of pressure of DIY guys. It's a difficult one to DIY. So, most of the operations are kind of in the lower stretches of that river. Like the bottom 20 miles or so, and there's one that's further up than that. But and so that's where a lot of the the fishing is. Probably let's say like the half, from 50 miles down is probably where the fishiest part of the river. But to access that, you have to have a jet boat and have to understand how to run rivers and that sort of thing. So it's not a very easy DIY trip, but there's several outfitters, and I would forget most of their names right now, but they run, they'll fly into the headwaters with rafts and outfit you, and you can do the float. And it's
cool. Yep.
I think it takes most people 10 days. I've heard of people doing it in 7 that just, really pushed through with kayaks, but I think it's more of a 9 to 11 day trip.
2 weeks would be awesome.
Yeah. So there's a lot of folks that do that and come down and
cool.
And all rave about it. It's a little burly of a trip from what I understand. You kind of got a lot of braids up top that you got to make sure you guess right on or cut through if you're early, that sort of thing. But
that's right. That sounds, it sounds like that's a cool thing about Alaska is that you can do everything. You could do that trip if you're into it, which would be awesome, but also the lodge with all amenities would be awesome as well. It seems like it's kind of got, it's got both. And is that the way, we're not going to dig into too much into the, some of the saltwater stuff or whatever that you've done, but is it, I guess, a little more challenging than, or which one would you say is more challenging to put together a DIY trip?
I would say it depends what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So Alaska logistically, I would say is more challenging, just because, you're organizing, bush planes and all the gear, and you have to deal with bears. So there's a lot of gear that goes along with that. Just to do it safe, what I mean? There's a lot of planning that goes into it. And the salt, I mean, there's a lot of salt, obviously, but, just take bonefish, for example. There are a lot of DIY bonefish spots that it's as easy as, getting a hotel pseudo lodge type place, getting a room essentially and getting a rental car and driving the road system to some flats and then walking around. Where I was in the Bahamas on South Andros, guys do that occasionally. We'd see a few of them. And we had a few flats on our side of the island that we could get out to on foot and generally do really well, but only during a certain window of the month because of the tides. But the most of the fishery is a extremely difficult, area to navigate. And so, our guides that are in it for 30 years are the guys that captain those trips. And so, you can't just get a boat, get a skiff and go rip around in there because there's no nav aids or anything like that. So that type of fishery would probably be just as challenging, in a lot of ways. But I would say probably the planning aspect in Alaska is pretty top tier logistics.
It is. Yeah. Here, no, that's a great point because, it takes a lot more. And the saltwater stuff, it might be tough to get out to some of those places, but like you said, if you can find a beach, and I recently talked to Ray Montoya, who actually has been fishing in Yemen, in that part of kind of the Middle East for I think like 20 years, and he's got some photos out there. You could Google it up, but his cot's on the beach, on some random beach. His truck's right next to him. He's just waking up and going out fishing in the Middle East. So
it sounds like paradise.
Exactly. That's what I know. That's what I told him. I was like, Jesus, this sounds like an amazing place to go. So you have to listen to that episode when it comes out, but,
will do.
So let's wrap this thing up. I got just a little rapid fire round. If you got a few more minutes here,
sure,
to jump into this. So, I kind of like to start this off with the 2-2-2, which is the top 2 flies, top 2 tips, and top 2 resources. And we can just keep it on that Alaska, Rainbow, Alaska West sort of thing. So do you have a couple of flies? And I guess, you talked about mousing and flesh flies and everything else, but if you had to pick 2, what would you do?
I would go, I'll always fish a mouse because it's hard to beat the fun factor of a mouse.
Yeah.
And the Mr. Hanky is one that we've fished for years and years and years. And that's, one of Jeff Hickman's patterns who guided Alaska West before my time. I think he got done the year before I did. But so there's some history there. So it's always kind of neat to fish. And I tie some of my own a little bit different to make them smaller and a little bit, just a little bit different how I like to fish them. So that would be one of them. And then in Alaska, anybody I've guided with knows that I'm obsessed with flesh flies for some reason, just because I think it's really cool. Those big, beautiful trout eat really big, ugly pieces of flesh.
Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty neat. And I carry them with me even this time of year when it's generally not the fly to fish, and have a few different, types of patterns that have ridiculous names and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But,
is that just
flesh flies in general? Yeah.
Is that just a piece of a white rabbit strip tied on a fly with a little flash? Or is that pretty much it? Or and do you have one name of a fly that we could look at?
It can be. I think I tie the majority of my flesh flies, so they're not really named. But they can be as simple as like a white or just kind of they always call it like dirty sock, like a grayish bunny. But I tend to get a little more nerdy into it. There's some great patterns out there, like called the Happy Meal, or Aqua Flies has a great articulated flesh fly. That's a really good fly. But generally they have like some beads in there to make it look like a little chunk of eggs and flesh. A lot of them get pretty fancy. They have a bunny tail and then collared with a different color that's kind of a peachy color, and then like a marabou collar to make it look real stringy. There's some art to it for sure, even though it's an ugly thing.
Are they weighted?
Yep, generally. Yep. Not all of them. Sometimes, you'll fish split shot to get them down, but some will have dumbbell eyes, some will have lead wraps under the body.
Yeah.
Yep. Because you want it down there for sure.
You want it down.
Get it then.
Yeah, you want it down close to the bottom. Okay, and what about, you mentioned a few tips already, but do you have a few, tips for fishing Alaska? If we're, I guess we could keep it on the rainbow. Just generally, it could be casting or fishing or anything that comes to mind that it could help somebody get into, maybe one of their trophy rainbows.
Yeah, I would say, let's see, I would say always set towards the tail. That's one thing that I think any guide can relate to that. But generally when you're looking for that special fish, one thing that usually ruins it is not hooking that fish, but landing that fish. And so one of the biggest mistakes we see, and I would assume most guides see on a regular basis, is especially when drifting or fishing moving water, is once that fish eats or the indicator goes down or takes the fly on the top, whatever it is. So I set that rod tip towards its tail side, or some people say set it downstream. And basically what that does, it always backs that fly back into the corner of its mouth rather than pull away from it.
Oh, right. And why is that different than
far too many?
Why is that different than your normal, I guess if you're doing a trout set on just kind of fishing for trout, whether it's a dry fly or something else, I guess say the dry fly, why not? I guess that's why they're coming at a different angle. So that's why you're not setting towards their tail with dry flies.
So I would argue you'd still want to set towards the tail on dry fly. So if you picture a fish eating a fly on the surface, right? You're not pulling parallel to the water, so to speak, but going up into to the downstream side.
Oh, right.
So just kind of crossing that. If you're fishing towards river right and the fish eats the fly, then you're going to be crossing, to your left shoulder to set the hook if you're right-handed. So basically trying to pull that fly into the direction that the fish is looking at it. Because usually what happens is a lot of anglers will pull the direction that's most comfortable to their shoulder. So whether that's the right direction or not. And in that moment when that fish, eats the fly, if they're pulling upstream, that's generally the case when you fight your fish for a few moments and then it pops off, because you're pulling the fly away from it. It caught a small piece of its lip, but never really sat in there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great you have one more that you might add again, thinking about the rainbow, or maybe I guess it could just be just a general. Is there anything that kind of for Alaska that covers it all from a general tip side?
Let's see.
And I guess you think about the tips, again, the blog post thing kind of sticks out there because it just seems like, how many years is that? 4 years of a blog post almost every day?
5.
Yeah, 5 years almost every day. It seems crazy. And I know some of them were short. Some of them were like the top 6 tips with a quick little summary. But yeah, and on all those tips, is it hard to weed through all that stuff you wrote? And is there stuff out there too that you don't even remember writing?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've tried to grab inspiration for, articles, freelance stuff, writing for magazines or whatever, and try to get some ideas for, future articles and that sort of thing. And I'll just Google, topics and find posts that I, wrote or had someone write or things like that, and be like, oh yeah, yeah, like, oh yeah,
that's cool.
Well, I'm thinking of that. Yeah, definitely have forgotten a lot of them. Yeah, for sure.
That's pretty awesome. So yeah, well, I think I've just got a few more quick ones I want to bust through here. So, do you have a go-to piece of gear that's maybe not necessarily fly fishing, that isn't a camera or a dry bag, something that you kind of don't leave home without?
Yeah, so I use a DeLorme. Technically, it's Garmin now, but I have an older edition InReach, which is like a satellite communicator. I forget what the technical term is, but basically like a spot locator.
Yep.
But the beauty of the DeLorme system is, I'll bring my smartphone, keep it in my waders or whatever, and which you don't even have to, but it makes it easy. But it pairs up with a smartphone and not only gives you the SOS button anywhere in the world through GPS if you had, if you broke a leg or had some issue that you needed help, but it's also a two-way communicator, so you can text through it as well.
Oh wow!
And so I try to keep that on me, whether I was guiding or when I go out to these lodges, to host some trips in Bristol Bay. I bring it with me because you never know, and then I take it when we go float for steelhead on a river that we know really well. I still bring it because it's really small. It's inexpensive of a service, like $11 per month or something, and it's a pretty good lifeline. Yeah, highly recommend if anybody fishes anywhere outside of a road system.
That's awesome. And what about, do you have a good favorite book, magazine, or resource?
Ooh, good question. Man, I read a lot. I would say a few of my favorite I read the Fly Fish Journal a lot. That's one of my favorites.
Nice.
Yeah, I read a lot of blogs, because I spend so much time kind of in the blog world. Gink and Gasoline, Lewis is a good friend of mine. A lot of the guys that have been creating fly fishing content for a long time have now become friends. And so I try to keep up on everybody's stuff and learn and try to hopefully make, my own writing better and that sort of thing. So
yeah. Okay.
A lot of resources out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just saying, you mentioned the Fly Fish Journal. I had, River Horse Nakadate on, and it was a great episode. We chatted about a bunch of stuff and even got into a lot that wasn't even fly fishing related, but he's written some cool stuff for the journal. And I just received a comment on that blog post. I do a blog post with each podcast that comes out. So
sure.
So it's an easy way for people to get, I get to some other information and links and stuff. But I had a comment on there, and it basically said, "Hey, thanks for the episode." And I just went and subscribed to the Fly Fish Journal for a year after listening to that because he talked about how amazing it was. But as far as the comments on the blog post, do you find? I mean, that seems to be a little bit of a struggle for me, getting interaction, on comments and things like that. Did you guys get? I think you had quite a bit of interaction. Did you read all the comments on each blog post, or how did you deal with all that?
Yeah, I tried to. It was, as it's hard to keep up on it if you do anything outside of the, create content. Most of us have jobs outside of that, and so at the time it would be at Alaska West. It was guiding 10 hours a day, and then also managing the fishing program, and then trying to write a post for tomorrow. Stay up till midnight, if not later. And so to stay on top of the comments, real time was always challenging, but I tried to, especially if it was, someone asked a question, about some specific like piece of gear or, tip or whatever. Tried to give a, genuine, long answered thing if I could. Or sometimes they would, in order to fill out one of those comments, they generally have to put their email address in there, which isn't displayed, but it does come through on the back end of WordPress. And so, if it was a long, lengthy thing that I thought no one would care about, or maybe they're asking about, rates or something like that, then I would try to just shoot people emails. And I've always, the writing side of things, the most rewarding part of it is being able to bring value, to fishermen, whether that's through my ideas or through ideas I hear about. It's all the same. And so I just really enjoyed being able to, connect with as many anglers as possible. And so anytime there was a comment that I could, communicate to someone with, I always tried to. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you think is the best the best resource for, say, Alaska, again, if we want to keep it to, maybe fishing for rainbows, is there another, a blog or a book or any other resource you'd recommend somebody read before they start putting together their trip up there, other than, say, Deneki or the stuff you've done?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or do you think Deneki is maybe one of the best resources out there?
I think the Deneki blog has put out the most content. I don't know if it's the best or not. But honestly, there's not a lot of Alaska.
Yeah, there's not.
I think Alaska. No, and I think Alaska was in the mind's eye. That's where everybody wanted to go. Say 15 years ago. And all fisheries have that. 1 year it's the Seychelles, and the next year it's Christmas Island, and then the next year it's Montana. And everybody has it. It's cyclical, and it comes back around. Kamchatka had to. For the longest time was the place everybody wanted to go, right?
You would think there would be more, I noticed that on my own, because when I was, occasionally when I do these episodes, I search, I'll search for the name like, Kyle Shea and podcast or something or video or to see what's out there. And, and Alaska, what came up, my own blog post with Brian O'Keefe. And I'm not sure.
No kidding.
I'm not sure if that's because the cookies were on my
probably
computer.
The cookies, yeah,
maybe the cookies, but I think again, just there wasn't a lot. There's not a lot of podcasts on Alaska. There's not. So it kind of surprised me. I was like, well, where's all the information?
Yeah, I think the reason for that is because Alaska, there's a lot of lifetime guides on a lot of fisheries that are super talented guides. Been in it for a long time, but there's so much turnover. At a lot of the fisheries where there's lodges. I think having that person to stay on board long enough to create content and it's not, most lodges and outfitters are very small companies and very leanly run. So they don't usually have a content guy, someone to just write all the time or do podcasts or things like that. So, and then because there's so much turnover, I think there's probably a lot of people bouncing around to gigs and stuff. Yeah, so
gotcha. There's
not a ton, but there's some. Gank and Gasoline run some stuff. Hopefully going to be putting out more soon. But the Orvis blog has always been a good resource for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'm sure there's some Alaska episodes out there on with Tom's stuff. So
yeah,
cool. Well, before I let you get out here, I guess a couple more quick ones. Do you have a favorite music band or type of music you like to listen to?
Oh man, we just had this conversation the other day at one of the lodges, and someone asked me that, and I said everything, and he told me everybody says that.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I change it per mood. I listen to a lot of lately I've been into Coulter Wall or Sturgill Simpson, kind of that underground country type stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
This time of year, but
cool.
At Alaska West, it was always a big deal to have the right music for when we had to do dishes.
Oh yeah,
and so. You had to keep the energy up, so we would go a lot more hip hop stuff or dub steppy stuff to stay in the zone. So
there you go. Shout
out to Dish Team Legit.
Nice.
But yeah, so it changes by the mood, I think.
Okay, all right, perfect. And you're how long you been doing this now? How long you been in the fly fishing? Kind of the industry or whatever.
Let's see. So this is my 7th year in Alaska. And probably, working in shops and guiding a little bit, probably 10, 11 years.
So 10, 11
give or
years.
take. Hard to remember. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Do you look out? Do you look out another 10 years or 15 or 20 years and think about, what do you want to be doing then, or is that something doesn't even cross your mind? You're just kind of going, because you've kind of made a big change now with the Bristol Bay and stuff there. But do you think about that? Your plans for the longer term?
Yeah, big time. I'm always. I would say I'm super introspective and probably too much of a dreamer at times for my own good. So I'm always trying to think of the next step, but it always involves fly fishing, to be entirely honest. Yeah. It's just kind of the avenue that I think I want to go. I think with this new change, it's a lot of different right now, not guiding full time or managing lodges. But what it's doing for me is allowing me to learn, an entirely different side of this industry, and hopefully spend more time with a rod in my hand, which I'm looking forward to.
That's right.
And I'd see it as, I genuinely love the fly fishing industry, not just fishing, and love every aspect of it, from the business side to the fishing side to the guiding side. And so if I can learn every piece of it, I can, then that's what I'm trying to do.
Yep.
So
awesome.
Yep.
Cool. Well, in the next 6 to 12 months, anything new coming up for yourself or kind of the companies you're working for, you want to let us know?
Yeah, we're in the pipe to drop some new websites, hopefully soon. Hopefully we'll get them out this summer. And so it's a big project, but hoping to get currently we have just a, face of our parent company at Bristol Adventures that redirects us kind of to our previous parent company called Cat My Land. But soon it'll be a brand new website, and then each gig will have their own website, and we're hoping to do some really cool stuff as far as start blogging again and creating content and ramping up our social media. So so it should start building real fast here soon. So that should be coming real soon. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. And then if people want to find you, either Kyle Shea flyfishing.com, is that the best place? Or
Yep. Yeah, that'll be, if they want to go check out, past articles, or blog posts, or, there's a little media page on there with some videos, as well as, a contact form that'll shoot me a email to my personal email address. And then if they want to, get a hold of me about trips or whatnot, they can, reach out at kyle.shea, SHEA, at bristoladventures.com. That's my work email. Or they can, anybody's more than welcome to reach out on Instagram at kshay_fly fishing. I tend to do a lot of communicating through there nowadays. Which
is Instagram
convenient. So
Instagram is the best on the social.
Yep. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, Kyle. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you sharing the the knowledge and the tips today. It's been a lot of fun, and definitely for all the work you've done. I know writing blog posts is not easy for a lot of people, and it sounds like you enjoy it. But definitely appreciate the resources that you've provided, and yeah, I'll keep in touch with you here as you go along. I'm excited to see where you're going to take your your work as you go.
Excellent, Dave. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, see ya.
All right, bud.
All right, bye. So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/92. Interested in heading out on a fishing trip with me and a few of our great guests from the podcast? We'll be heading out on a lodge trip to one of these amazing destinations next year, and I need 10 people who are ready for a trip of a lifetime. Go to wetflyswing.com/destination to find out more and to get your name in the hat for this trip and ones to follow. Thanks again for stopping by and check out the show day. Look forward to catching up with you soon and hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.